Hello. Our next
Jennifer,
presenter, hi. Our
good
next
morning.
presenter is Harry Pratt. Harry is the president and CEO of Allen and Hoshall, and he's located in their Memphis office. He has been with the firm for 45 years and is a professional civil engineer licensed to work in and practice in 6 different states. He's been an active member of a number of associations, including Consulting Engineers of Tennessee, the American Consulting Engineers Council, the National Society of Professional Engineers, the U of M Executive MBA Alumni Association, the Christian Brothers University Construction Engineering and Inspection Consortium, and Kiwanis International. He has also served on several advisory boards, including the Harif College of Engineering Dean's Advisory Board, the Christian Brothers University Engineering Dean's Advisory Board, and the Christian Brothers CEE Department Advisory Board. And with that, I'll turn it over to Harry.
Thank you, Jennifer. Can y'all hear me okay? Jennifer, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, let me explain to you what has happened here in my office in Memphis. We were supposed to have a fire drill this morning at 10 o'clock. It was supposed to be over by 10:30. Well, they haven't started the drill yet, so I'm in plan B, which is in my car on a hotspot with my notebook on my lap. So hopefully all this is going to stay connected. We'll see if we can get through this. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to speak with you about what has been the funnest project I have ever worked on in 45 years. And I will go into a little more detail about that in a few minutes. I thought, first of all, we spent a few minutes talking about the history of the bridge. We've got some really cool pictures and examples or sketches right out of the original design drawings of 100 years ago. We'll talk about how we got from that point in time to where we started to rebuild the walkway, repurpose it, if you will. And then I'm going to talk about some of the challenges to managing that large program. It's a $40 million program. Talk about some of the design challenges, talk about what the project looked like when we got finished with design, and then spend some time talking about the actual construction of the project itself, because there's several innovations in there that are worth talking about. This is a historical perspective. This is pictures dated about 1916. You're on the Tennessee side. You're looking south. You see the two bridges. The bridge that we're talking about, Harahan, is already complete. It's the bridge closest to us in this photograph. The one behind it is the Frisco Bridge. Here's the Frisco Bridge. It was built quite a bit earlier, 1892. At the time, the third largest bridge in the world, which is kind of amazing when you consider the length is just about a mile for that bridge over the waterway proper. Owned by one railroad. It was a single track bridge. It was a very busy place. They said before this bridge was built, it took 2 weeks to get a train across the river. You know, how they got across the river was they'd roll it down some long inclines on the Tennessee side, put the cars on a barge, float them across the river, and reassemble the train. Even with the one crossing, by the time 1910 came along, it was getting crowded again. There were now 5 railroads coming into Memphis, 2 coming into West Memphis. Frisco had a monopoly, and a bunch of other railroad companies formed a group and decided they wanted a second bridge across the river at Memphis. Enter Mr. Ralph Majeski. He got the assignment to build the bridge. Notice the dates on here. These are disturbing for me because I do consulting engineering. It says he was hired on April the 10th, 1913. Submitted plans on May the 13th, 1913. And I didn't prepare this slide. A friend of mine did, so I'm not sure about his dates, but I can't believe that drawing set was prepared in, what is that? 5 weeks, 6 weeks? But the man had a great reputation. You see, he'd already designed 40 major bridges, including 5 over the lower Mississippi River. By the way, Mr. Majeski's firm is still in business, believe it or not, Majeski and Masters, and they worked on our project. They are still working for the railroad on this very bridge. By the way, this bridge will have, what happened? Page down is not working here. Well, Oh, there we go. So the first thing they did when they got the commission to start the project was to build a railroad track. They needed 2 miles of track to get from across the floodplain in West Memphis to get to the edge of the water. You know, this work was started in July of the same year, 2013. So they got the project approved and the track built in 2 months. Again, I can't imagine those dates are complete. Either that or Mr. Majeski had started designing the bridge before he got the assignment. Anyway, here's what he was trying to do. Let me get my pointer up here for you. Here's the railroad we were just talking about. Came off existing tracks, came across the floodplain, terminated water's edge. There is a pier they built there. The foundation of that pier is still there. You can see it today. We're the bridge on the right-hand side. The upper right-hand side will be the Harahan. The Frisco is down below it. They're similar lengths. Of course, their substructures had to line up because we're in the river. We couldn't have piers that were not aligned to each other. And then you see the rail yard going into the city where all the train stations were down in this area. One interesting fact, even when this map was drawn, you see this incline up here in the upper right corner? That's one of the inclines to get the trains down to water's edge and then brought them across to the Arkansas side of the river, reassembled the train, continued to the west. So we're going to go through a couple of these are historic pictures. They built 15 barges in 3 months to build the bridge. They needed 21 barges in total. Here we are. This is pier number 2, by the way. You see in the background, there's pier number 3 already constructed. There's pier 4. There's another structure on the grounds. They're looking to the west towards Arkansas. You see the laborers are constructing willow mats that are going to sink to the bottom of the river. It's a different picture of it, assembling the mat. You get an idea of the scale of this thing when you see the workers and the boats around them and the finished product. Now we're moving it into place. There's pier number 3. Again, we're working on pier 2. The mat is being brought in. This picture is probably taken from the structure of the Frisco Bridge itself. They're getting ready to sink the mat into the ground. The bottom of the river is a very fluid environment. It is not stationary. There's something called bed load and there's something called suspended load. Bed load is the river dragging the bottom of the channel, if you will, down to New Orleans. It is a very dynamic situation. The purpose of the mat was to keep the river from moving around the foundations as they constructed it. You want some more background on working under the water on the Mississippi, I would suggest a book called Rising Tide by John Berry. It is a great read. It actually gives you quite the history of the Corps of Engineers and the Lower Mississippi River Commission and all the bridges and John Eads, and it's a great read. It'll surprise you what they had to put up with. Anyway, they got the mat in the ground. It's been sunk. They're now starting to install the pneumatic caisson. These are big steel boxes, stone boxes. They're 4-sided, 5-sided box. They got the lid on the top. Bottom is open, and they start digging their way down. Here's another picture of it, getting positioned. They dig their way through the river bottom. They put men in the bottom of this thing. Sand hogs, they call them. It is under pressure. They dig out the material. It is lifted through a series of water locks out of the top. And as this thing sinks into the ground, they build the pier on top of it. Now, these drawings come right out of the Harahan construction plan set. These are the things that Majeski's firm actually produced. You note there's no rock at the bottom of that pier. There's no rock in this part of the state of Tennessee. It's 1,500 feet down. They went down to good hard clay. I do not have the elevation, but it's quite deep into the sediment of the river. And then the stone pier is coming out of the top of it. This again is pier number 2. One of the anchors, or one of the piers, which is number 1, which is on the Tennessee side, was not meant for compression. It was meant for uplift. I'll show you why in a minute, but look at the statistics across the bottom. almost 11,000 pounds of dead weight designed to withhold a 7 million pound pull. Here's why they needed the pull. This is the cross section of the bridge, again out of the construction plan set. On the right is the Tennessee side. There is the anchor with the 7 million pounds of uplift provided for. You have the anchor arm, then the first cantilever, which is why they had the anchor to hold that in. They built the span section. I'll come back to that in a minute. Here's pier number 2, which you saw the pictures of it going in. At a cantilever section going back towards Tennessee, the fixed span was built in place on false work. That was the weight that held this piece of cantilever and held the west side piece of cantilever. When you get to the Arkansas shore here, they had this piece in, they had false work out to a point, and then they connected to the cantilever. Most of this bridge was built with false work. The exception is this section right here. It's 790 foot between Pier 1 and Pier 2. That's one half of the main river channel. Most barge traffic comes between Pier 1 and Pier 3, with predominance between Piers 1 and 2. So they had to keep the river open for traffic, so that's how they accommodated that project requirement. These are pretty cool. These are actual pictures of the construction underway. Here we're on the Tennessee side. That is the upper lift anchorage right there. That's the cantilever section headed out towards the river. There's our pier number 2. You see false work going in over there between piers 3 and 4 on the far side of the river. Between 1 and 2, there's the 2 cantilever sections. They're working on getting ready for the suspension section. Here it is. They're making the connections. They lifted it up and they're putting it into place. Here's the false work between 2 and 3. And then there's the stone here for number 3. And then there's the false work between 3 and 4. You can see, and this looks to be a rendering to me. You see the superstructure of the truss in the background getting put together. But we're in the river. We had a problem in 1915, had a big flood come through, lost all the false work between the piers. You see it's knocked out. It knocked the span 8 inches out of alignment that was already constructed. Totally destroyed between piers 3 and 4. 2 is in the background. 2 and 3 is here. 3 and 4 is here. Lost all of that false work and the superstructure that had been constructed. Had a pile of rubble. Here is the dock I mentioned earlier. The materials were brought out on that dock. Remnants are still there, believe it or not. Redesigned it a little bit so they had less false work. Came back, rebuilt all the pieces that were missing. In July of 1916, which is about 3 years later, they were done with the project for the trains. Again, 2 tracks on this structure. I'll put my notes here. That's a construction period of about 3 years to build that bridge. In fact, it was July of 13 to July of 16. About 14 months later, they finished what was called the wagon ways. At the time, there were about 1,000 cars in this part of the country. So traffic wasn't a problem, but there were wagons, and they're actually illustrated or shown in this picture. There was a wagon way on the north side of the track and a wagon way on the south side of the track, one way in each direction. So 17th or the 25th of August in 1917, a very significant thing happened. The railroad sold to Clinton County, Arkansas, and the city of Memphis the wagon ways. Now, they didn't do this out of benevolence. They were told to do this by the U.S. government. It was part of their permission to build the bridge. Is they would build these roadways or these wagon ways, and then would give it to the local governments. That's a very important fact that made our project possible. The wagon ways, converted to roadways, served as one of the very few highway crossings south of St. Louis till you get to New Orleans until 1949. Now, they did make the roadway a little wider. It was 14 feet when they started. They got it a little bit wider, but it's still a pretty narrow way. That brings us to a more current time. In the 1990s and the 2000s, there were several ideas to repurpose the automobile pathways. This whole idea of rails to trails was getting to be a bigger idea. The idea that we would walk out and look back over the city of Memphis. The best view of the city of Memphis is from the middle of the river, looking back to the skyline. They tried several different ideas. One of the biggest problems they always came up with was money and getting this thing going. Well, one guy took this upon himself to make it happen. That's Charlie McVane. Interesting. His father, as I understand the story, worked for the Corps of Engineers. I don't know that Mr. McVane Sr. was an engineer, but I think his backgrounds were there. But Charlie himself was self-made. He started Vane Trading Investments, trading commodities. He took it upon himself to get this project built for the city of Memphis. He is a railroad enthusiast. He's a philanthropist. I've been in his office. He has a model railroad train running above all the offices on suspended tracks he hung from the ceiling. He puts GoPro cameras on the train and drives it around the yard, around the office from time to time. He's a nice fellow. Got a lot of money. He likes to share with what he's got. Come to find out, he trades cattle. A lot of the cattle companies have offices in Omaha, Nebraska. The UP Railroad, who owns the tracks on the Harahan Bridge, has their corporate offices in Omaha, Nebraska. So Mr. McVane called some friends, got an audience with the chairman of the board of the railroad, got a permission to bring some people up there, took 2 jet planes full of Memphis politicians, fellow philanthropists, engineers, and he convinced the railroad that it would be a good idea to let the local communities build on these roadbeds. Now, the fact that the city and the county own the roadbeds helped make the argument. That fact was lost to history until we got into the project. And another Charlie Newman, found the paperwork balled up in an old file in the courthouse. Anyway, so we got started, got everything put together. The problem is it's going to cost a lot of money to build this bridge. The city had some other projects they wanted to do. Crittenden County had some projects they wanted to do. Everybody got together. They formed up a coalition of 2 governments, 2 cities, and a big project, and they decided they'd go for a Tiger Grant. Tiger Grants are extremely difficult and competitive. In 2020, there were 703 applications for the Tiger Grants, 47 awards. That's a success rate of just under 7%. Memphis got one, which is amazing to start with. Memphis got exactly what they asked for, $14.9 million. Unheard of to get the amount of money that you requested. But we now had a project. We now had money. So this is about the time I got involved in the project. They got the grant application in March of 2012. They got the grant terms back to them in December of 2012. They had to have the design done by May of 2013. They hadn't started yet, but they had to have it done in 5 months. And they had to be under construction no later than the end of the year or they lose the grant. There's no wiggle in that statement. So they had a grand party, I understand, the day they got the award. And then the next day in the hangover, they realized, oh, damn, we've got to get busy. That's when I went and hired my company to start managing the project and start hiring the design teams and moving towards construction. Uh-oh, wait a minute, that's not right. Wrong button. Hold on. Let me get back to where it was. Hit the end before I got there. Okay, so I'm hired as a program manager. As I said earlier, this is the funnest thing I've ever done. It is not the most technically challenging. It wasn't difficult to get through, but it was more fun. It was a project that was very popular. There was no opposition. Everybody wanted to talk about it. The media came out on a regular basis and wanted tours. I led people all over this place. Even before we opened it, we were going through construction sites with various PPE equipment. It was just a fun thing to work on, but it had some real challenges. Client management, funds management, and record keeping were big deals I had to deal with up front. Client management, I had 2 of everything. I had the Federal Highway Administration. I had two cities, Memphis and West Memphis. I had two states, Tennessee and Arkansas, two county governments, Shelby County and Crittenden County. I had Tennessee DOT. I had the Arkansas DOT. I had MATA for a portion of the project. And then, of course, the railroad, which is the 500-pound gorilla. There were a lot of people that wanted reports and information and coordination. This was a difficult thing. I had a good boss working with me, a guy named Paul Morris. We divided it up. He took care of the political side of this list of people. I took care of the technical side and the money side of this list of people. And we worked side by side for 3 years and managed to make sure none of the brush fires got out of control. Funds management. This is where I spent many hours every week. There are 11 lines on that screen. Each one of those lines gave us money. Each one of those lines had different sets of rules for their money. Some of it you could build, you could use for design. Some of it you could use only for construction. Some of it you could use in Arkansas, but nowhere else. Some you could use in Tennessee, but only on one segment. Some of it was private money. There were a couple of taxing agencies in there. This is where I spent a great deal of time trying to keep the budget balanced or managed. There's $40 million on this table in this list of people. They made it more complicated for me. There were 11 colors of money. That's the term we use, 11 colors of money. They divided it into 8 categories of cost. 11 categories of cost. 3 were soft costs, design, CEI, and then program management. And then 8 were items of construction, which are down along the left-hand edge. Let me highlight that for you. On this edge, I had to keep up with these. Each one of those categories. And then I had 5 different construction projects going at the same time. So 11 times 5, that's 605 individual budgets. Now, a couple of them were zeros, but each one of these had a budget. And there were 5, this is a summary. There are 5 more spreadsheets deep going into this. This was a lot of work. It really was. Record keeping, Tiger grants are notoriously record generating grants. Quarterly reports, annual reports, regular federal highway who manage our project reports. The Bureau of Labor Statistics heard about our project. I had to report to them every month how much money we spent, how many jobs we created. Of course, DOT had their documentation. This was handled like a local project. All the funding sources needed documentation. And then all the electronic and paper document retention policy. I did some checking. There are 30 file drawers full of paper in the storehouse here in Memphis. 1/4 of a terabyte of data on jump drives, actually bricks. 60,000 individual files are being stored for this project. Let's talk about what we started with. Now I'm gonna start drilling down a little bit. This is what it looked like when I walked up there in 2012. Main was a large project, started up in the Memphis Main Street on the the right-hand side of the screen. Across the river, went many miles into Arkansas. We're going to quit talking about everything except what we called segment 4, which is right across the river. And there we are. The blue line represents the walkway that was built under this contract. It's across the river. All right, this is a pretty good picture. We need to talk about this a little bit. This is Harahan's on the extreme left. There's the Frisco. This is the bridge that now takes highway traffic across as Interstate 55. If you look closely, you see there's a cantilevered structure here. This is the south side of the bridge. You'd see the incline coming down. That's the original walkway if you were driving to Tennessee. There's a lookalike piece on the opposite side, the north face, which is where our walkway is being constructed. So you get the view going back to the city of Memphis, which actually is back here in the upper left corner of the picture. There's what it looks like right at the west portal of the Harahan. I'm in Arkansas looking back to Tennessee, track 1, track 2. Here's the walkway we're going to be constructing on. Notice a little wiggle here. That causes a little grief. It's just a little shimmy as it went around the edge of the truss. This up here was part of the original telegraph wires that brought wires across the bridge back in the early 1900s. Here's the bottom of the incline. You were standing up there with the previous picture. Now you're down at the bottom. You're about 3,000 feet away. That incline is 3%, which is ADA compliant. Lord, no, we didn't know we were going to need that at the time in 1916, but we got it. Of course, you see the overgrowth that's happened. There's been no maintenance done on the walkways since the road beds were pulled up in 1949. As you exited the Harahan on cars back in 49, you went on some concrete structures. In this case, I'm standing on the Harahan Bridge. This bridge right here is the Frisco. The cars will be coming down, merge into a 2-lane road, and they go under the Frisco and go over to what is now I-55. This all was walked off and abandoned in 1949. Now, let's talk about the challenges for the design of this project before we get into the actual project. First, we had State Historic Preservation Office, and we had some utilities, some framing issues, and a lot of security issues to deal with. SHPO, City Historic Rail, it was put up in 1916. Somebody wanted to take it off. It is very heavy rail. We were very weight conscious on our project. It's not OSHA compliant anything. Here's the rail sitting right there. Some people thought it was ugly, wanted to take it off. First of all, I liked it. I was not one to want to take it off. I was not the deciding factor. Actually, the state of Tennessee was the deciding factor, and they said, you're going to keep the historic rail. Fiber optics. We had 3 of them. This is the picture standing in Tennessee, looking to Arkansas. See 2 large conduits right there at the base. Zoom in, they're 4.5-inch steel conduits. One belonged to MCI, one belonged to Sprint. Hear those 2 guys talking. The entire eastern and western paths of our country communication went through those 2 pipes. Now, I don't know how true that is, but they warned us we could not damage them or move them. We certainly didn't have time to move them or budget to move them, given the tiger considerations. AT&T was in the scene too. There's a much smaller conduit down in the structure proper. This was sometimes in conduit, sometimes went overhead as a cable. I don't know why, but we had to deal with that. That one we were able to move out of the way. We just kind of nudged it so it wasn't in our immediate construction. Okay, structural framing. I got to pick up the pace here. This is what the roadway looked like when we got there in 1916. They expanded it out and made it a little bit wider. There's the bracket there. Replaced the wood with steel. 1940. 1949, they quit taking traffic. They took the deck off. This is what we started building with when we got there in 2012. This is what it looked like for us. Here's our solution. Existing structure here. There's a gusset or a bracket about every 20 feet. We put steel stringers perpendicular to that, a walkway on top, and railing on the side. And you see my utilities are tucked here out of the way. And there's AT&T, just bumped out of the way of that stringer. Here's a little better picture of it right here. You can see. Safety and security. Lots of worry here. Lots of worry. Let me get you. Hey, railroad security. Had pedestrian security. Homeland Security was very concerned about this bridge. We wound up putting cameras, pull stations, and lighting. We had to protect the pedestrians from train objects falling off the train. Had to protect them from falling in the river. Cameras, security, lighting, emergency pull stations. They want an 11-foot wide fence on the railroad side. We need a 54-inch high fence on the river side. Give you some ideas of what it kind of looked like. This is kind of what the structure looks like. These are models that we built. All the stuff in aluminum color is new. The stuff in copper is existing on these pictures. On the inclined walkway, we had to put a roof on top of this so if things fell off the railroad car, they wouldn't knock somebody out. We proposed to use mesh as we first got started. Here's kind of a mock-up of the lighting, the camera, and the pull station as we conceived it in the design process. We'd love to use the old steel that was left there back in 1949, but when they ripped off the deck, you see what they did to the top flange. It made it garbage. We had to throw them away, scrapped them out. Some other issues we had to deal with was rust, no bridge, pack rust here, section lost, see it here, 4 rivets missing there, another picture of damaged steel. All of these had to be corrected. Look at that piece of steel. You can see right through it there. Debris and pack rust there, cracked brackets, more debris or scaling on the steel. It was a mess. When it got done, this is the design. I'm just going to walk through these quickly. These are the drawings that we put in the plan set, but they're easier to understand in the actual plans and sections. So just walk through them quickly. Tennessee side, headed across, walking to Arkansas. So we step out off of the anchorage, head out over the water. This is what it's going to look like. Notice we had to keep it very straight. This is a big deal during construction. Notice I had an overlook there. We built 2 of those, so a spot you can get a little wider spot in the road, if you will. A walkway is only 10 foot wide. That is all we could manage to get with the weight limitations that we had during the initial design. Different perspective. The incline portion, similar cross section, except we had a roof on it. We got to the far end into Arkansas. We had trains on the top, pedestrians on the bottom. We needed canopy structures to protect our people from getting stuff falling on them. That's the Harahan undercrossing. Similar problem going under the Frisco Bridge. We built a second one there. That's the old concrete deck that I showed you a few minutes ago. That was the exit roadway. We turned it into a respite area and a trailhead on that end. So we had $19 million in a budget. The engineer said we could get it for a little under $17 million. Those were my 2 bids. I only got 2 bidders. I think bidder 1 was a courtesy bid. Bidder 2 was $2 million over my budget. I had a real problem. My construction deadline is looming quickly. Initiation of construction. We had to make decisions. So we decided to rebid. There's some issues with rebidding. We had to get prices held. We considered we wanted to change some of these other parameters. We talked about expanding the reach. We talked about extending the construction duration. These are all issues we were fighting our way through. We wound up accepting all of them, except that we kept 30% minimum for the GC and we kept the LDs at $2,000 a day. We did extend the construction to 480 days total. Technical side were all kind of issues that we were having to deal with. We decided to change the design vehicle from H10 to H5. That went from a small pickup truck to a gator. We considered rotating the framework for steel reduction. That was a big savings. We considered prefab options, leaving stringers in place, different methods of risk sharing for structural preparation, redesigned the camera system. These are just some of the ideas. We wound up accepting all of those, except for the alternate material for the fencing. There was no other way to do that. That was the only option we had. So here's what we did for reframing. This is what we did originally. We had stringers across the bottom, everything built in place out of component pieces. We turned the framing the other way. We put the stringers going this way. We put additional beams, just 2, running perpendicular in and out of the page. That meant all the existing steel, which is omitted for clarity, is sitting right there. The old stringers are sitting right there. Took out my utilities there, took out my utility there, but we lifted everything up and turned it a different direction. Greatly reduced the amount of steel that we needed on the project. We also identified that we could maybe go wider since it was not as heavy. So we took 3 alternates: a wider walkway that was prefabricated, a 10-foot walkway out of component pieces like I just showed you, or a 10-foot walkway that was prefabricated. We had to, we could play with the extra weight that we had involved. So the base bid, or the base was designed on, or the product was designed on alternate 2, 10-foot stick construction. But if you went with prefab and it was lighter, you could make the walkway wider and went 11.5 feet wide. If you went the other way, your live load's the same, but if you have to, take off stringers to get it to weight. At the end, you can't weigh more than 1,520 pounds per linear foot with your construction. This table helped our bidders decide which way they wanted to go when they rebid the project. Here are the rebids. Here are the 3 alternates that we had. You didn't have to bid on all of them. You had to pick 1, 2, or 3, or all of the above. Bidder 1 was the same guy that bid it the first time. He came in at $17.5 million. Bidder 2 gave us all three options, but he was not low in any of the three alternate cases. So rebidding saved us just under $4 million. We lost about 6 weeks of time that we scrambled to get caught back up on, but we did save a lot of money, got us back in project. Let's talk about what the contractor did to save this. One thing he planned is to do a mock-up. This is a full-scale mock-up made in a fabrication yard. You see the high side on the left, the river side on the right, the walkway planks, they went from the stringers up. Notice this bar sticking out here. The idea was that was actually going to be put in the real walkway when we got through with the demonstration of the project. We actually sent this down to Memphis, put it in one of the parks down by the river, and let people come down and look at it while we were building it to build enthusiasm for the project. Got a couple of the pictures of this. We walked through it. This close-ups of the different parts. See the walkway there on the right side and the holes. Ideally, that planking would have been turned 90 degrees, but it didn't work for us in our framing option. Notice perforations. I said we keep the water off, and it's got a real rough finish. We don't want anybody slipping because it'll ice up in them in a heartbeat out there. This is kind of how we want everything to look. We want to check out all the devices. You see the light there. You see the camera, the junction boxes, the photo sensor there, a prox sensor right next to it. We checked everything out, including how we route the conduits, how we fasten them. We wanted everything addressed in this issue or in this mock-up. Another thing the contractor did that saved him money, he built a working platform that he suspended from the old bridge and he slid it underneath there so he was not working off of barges and false work coming from the bottom up. He worked from the old structure. It's kind of hard to see, but they're 100 foot long, built two of them. This is the old bridge beam here. He bolted on some drop rods, came down, put a trolley system, which you see off here to the right, and built his working platform that he could roll with him as he constructed the walkway. Greatly expedited getting the crews underneath to make the connections that they needed to make. The best idea he had was he figured out he could pre-assemble the component work and drag it onto the river. This is what really made it work. He built a yard. The spacing of those concrete blocks is the same as the brackets on the river, on the bridge over the river. They built these. Unfortunately, I don't have a good picture of it. He pre-assembled the pieces. This is the portal walking towards Arkansas. You can see he's got a construction walkway. The new walkway is going to go here. There's my utilities again. He would drag up 80 feet, two 40-foot sections. At times, he got up to three 40-foot sections. And he would hook a cable to it and drag it 2,200 foot to Arkansas. He drug first two, next two, next two. So most of his assembly work, including all the electrical conduit within the 40-foot or 80-foot reach, was pre-assembled before it ever left the ground. A little hard to see on this one, but there's the first 80 feet of our walkway on the far Arkansas side. That's the day they poured it. The first day took a long time to get there. They got better as they got after it. Here's the walkway in place. This is a joint. See, notice here how they left it. Here's what it looked like when the next piece was poured in behind it. And they just walked themselves from Arkansas back to Tennessee. Now, when they got over the Arkansas floodplain, they simply picked it up with a crane sitting on the ground. And it was much easier to go with. So here's what we ended up with. We bid, it wound up being $17.6 million. We did have change orders. A lot of steel repairs we had to pick up. Wound up being $19.4 million. Remember, my budget was 19.3, 19.4 change. So we just got it in under the budget for the Harahan part of the project. Finished product. We're proud of this. I do not have statistics, unfortunately. You get several 100,000 people a year using the facility. You see it's 10 foot wide. Notice the effort we made to keep everything straight. We told the contractor, it's like looking down the barrel of a rifle. You can't see any misalignment. It's got to be just perfect. And they worked real hard to get us there. One last thing that happened, right at the very last 6 months of the project, a different philanthropic group decided they wanted to light the bridge. There are some 100,000 points of light, all LED, multicolored, 3-color LED. across that bridge, there's a series of 1, 2, 3, 4 bars of light. And this is the product that we ended up with. There are 13 astronomical events. There's a light show every night. I think it's at the top of the hour and the bottom of the half hour. The companion bridge, the I-40 bridge, which is a couple miles upriver from here, has also had lights installed on it. Similar light patterns, and every night we have a light show on the river in Memphis. And that's kind of the end of the presentation. Do we want to try and do questions at all, Jennifer?
Yes, we have got approximately 8 minutes for questions. So good job and fantastic job on working around your technological issues. You probably still haven't had that fire drill yet.
We still haven't had that fire drill yet. You're right. I'm looking in the back parking lot and there's no fire truck in sight.
Does anybody have any questions for Harry? Okay, I have one. Kelly asks, who maintains the lights?
The lights are maintained by a group in Memphis. It's called Mighty Lights. It's a public-private company that was set up by the people that gave the city the money for the lights, gave them enough money for maintenance for 10 years. And they also, when they bought the lights, they got them from Philips Signify. The Philips contract has in it a material only warranty clause in there. So if a light goes bad, they just call up Philips and say, hey, I can have to call them like that computers. They know the light's out. So basically, they bought maintenance for 10 years in advance, which is pretty smart. You know how city governments have a tendency to raid your maintenance budgets when things get tight.
Yes, I think we've all experienced that. There are a lot of comments that say, great job, fantastic presentation, amazing project. So good job. I have a personal question.
Okay.
Is this part of any race, like marathon, half marathon, 5K, 10K courses in the Memphis area?
It is. They have had a couple of those. They had an inaugural one. It was rebranded to the BRX, Bee River Crossing, after we got through with it. They've had a couple of them where you go across. The problem is it's only 10 foot wide. You know, ideally you want to go across and come back. So they have to have enough separation or time so you would get over on the Arkansas side, your runners spread out, make the loop and come back. But yes, they do that. Something I did mention is that I basically ran out of time. There are a series of trails in Arkansas that run the whole state. They're walking up and down the banks of the levees. And they're going all the way to New Orleans and going all the way north to St. Louis. The trail here ties to that trail system. So if you get on here, you can walk out, you reach a levee, you make a left or right turn, and it's a paved trail that goes hundreds of miles upriver and downriver. It's quite an initiative for a different group of people.
That's amazing. Does this tie to any trails in the Memphis area?
It does. We have a River Bluff walk. It starts way up north, comes down along Wolf River. It comes across the top of the bluff. We intersect with it at our bridge. It's going to go under our structure. There's already a piece down there. It's one of the old inclines I talked about where the railroad tracks used to be. It's going to go all the way down south. I don't know how far south it's going to go. It may go all the way to the state line. But yes, there's a similar trail on the Tennessee side. It's generally speaking, it's paved asphalt or concrete, whereas Arkansas they're using a crushed gravel because they're going hundreds of miles, literally hundreds of miles each direction.
Wow, that's amazing. Kelly asks, who monitors the cameras?
Cameras are monitored by Real-Time Crime Center in Memphis. I believe I remember the number. There are 46 cameras. I thought 2 would have been enough, but there were 46. They're all high resolution. They're 200 foot on center. They all have video feeds to the Real-Time Crime Center, and they all have recording capabilities. They record locally for 2 weeks, and they record at the crime center forever. Homeland Security has access to a feed, and the UP Railroad has access to a feed. It is not public. You don't have any public access.
Awesome. I'm waiting to see if anybody has any more questions. I know that I used to live in Memphis and I moved to Mississippi right after, when this project was being constructed.
You can come up here. It's a pretty cool thing. The fireworks, when you get out on the bridge and you look back to the city when we have fireworks events, they do have to close it in bad weather. And we've had to close it. with icy conditions and all. It does ice up, but we got some big gates on each end. We called them the Jurassic Park gates. That's exactly what they look like. You know, that opening scene of the movie, we had this gargantuan gate. We had one on each end that locks it up. It closes at 10:30 at night, typically. Opens at sunrise.
Okay. Maybe we will take an AOCE group from Mississippi up there.
That would be fun. We could get you out there and maybe get you in some parts of it you don't normally get to see.
Yes. If anybody's interested in that, let me know, because I would be interested in it and we can help set that up. Well, I don't think anybody has any more questions.
Well, people, I had fun. This is a fun project. I love talking about it. I really do.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Harry.
Okay, guys. Goodbye.
Bye.